Fighting to belong, stories of the Windrush generation struggle to remain in the United Kingdom. Weekend Business Report starts right now. Hello and welcome to the show. I'm Kenil Gale. Thanks for joining us this week. Jamaicans caught up in the Windrush controversy were able to breathe a sigh of relief this week as British Prime Minister Theresa May promised them that she would rectify the situation. We're taking a closer look in a bit, but right now here are some of the top news stories BAT brought you this week. The IMF's executive board says crime, bureaucracy, and insufficient labor force skills continue to hamper Jamaica's growth. The multilateral is also warning that the country is at risk of reform fatigue. The information was contained in the IMF's analysis of Jamaica's third review under the precautionary standby arrangement. Javon Keys has more.
The IMF's executive board says Jamaica's economic reform program that began in 2013 has been a turning point for the country, as considerable progress has been achieved on macroeconomic policies and outcomes. However, the board is lamenting the fact that growth and social outcomes have been discouraging. Economic growth continues to disappoint, averaging only 0.9% since the reforms began. The IMF says entrenched structural obstacles, including crime, bureaucratic processes, insufficient labor force skills, and poor access to finance, continues to hinder productivity and growth. Moreover, the agricultural sector's vulnerability to weather shocks exacerbated rural poverty in 2015. The IMF argues that not addressing these bottlenecks could pose risks for continued public support for the government's policy program. Meanwhile, the multilateral continues to point out that structurally reducing the wage bill is critical for the government to reprioritize spending toward growth-enhancing projects. The IMF argues that more expenditure is needed for infrastructure, citizen security, building agricultural resilience, health, education, and the social safety net. But creating the space for such spending will require going beyond temporary remedies like wage freezes and adjustments to non-wage benefits. The agency says this can only be achieved if high-quality measures are pursued. These include overhauling the compensation structure to retain skills and reward performance, streamlining the vast and inequitable allowances structure, prioritizing key government functions and shedding those activities that it can no longer afford to undertake, and changing the capital labor mix through technology upgrades, including a better monitoring of and accountability for government spending. The IMF adds that inevitably, these reforms will also require a reduction in the size of the public workforce. Formalizing the current inflation targeting regime is also important, as the IMF says. This will help entrench macroeconomic stability and promote growth. In the meantime, the IMF says after 5 years of reforms and tenacious fiscal consolidation, risks from reform fatigue and loss of social support are high, especially as growth remains feeble and crime escalates. But the multilateral notes that addressing some of the entrenched structural problems that hamper growth is not an overnight task, as these difficult reforms require continued broad-based support and policymakers' commitment to persevere with the implementation.
Cyclical upswing, structural change, that was the theme of the IMF's World Economic Outlook report for 2018. The report was released in Washington, D.C. a few days ago. Andrew Laidley was there.
Thanks, Kenil. Well, according to the Economic Counselor and Director of Research at the IMF, Maurice Obstfeld, things are looking good for the future, but as we expected, there's a shadow of uncertainty hovering over the global economic outlook amid the current trade disputes between major world economies, namely China and the US. Deputy Division Chief of the Research Department, Malhar Nabar, says there's no way to measure the impact the potential trade war could have on a small island nation like Jamaica just yet, but it's something the IMF is monitoring.
In terms of the spillovers from the trade war, it's still too early to assess this. The measures that are being talked about at the moment, our sense is that the direct impact on the directly affected countries is likely to be quite limited, but of course there's an issue of how financial markets react to this, the sentiment in financial markets, and to the extent that frontier economies, other economies in the sub-Saharan African region are affected by the changes in financial markets, that could be a channel through which these economies are affected by the developments that we're seeing on the trade front.
Meanwhile, Director Obstfield says if things worsen on the global trade frontier, the impact will be far-reaching.
I think if we get into a cycle of very widespread actions and counteractions, we would begin to see significant economic effects, and that would be, whether you call it trade war or not, would be very worrisome.
Steer clear of protectionism, that's the word from IMF Managing Director Christine Lagarde. The IMF chief says she does not believe countries are doing all they can to facilitate collaborative dialogue, especially on issues of trade. Here's more.
Thanks, Kenny. Now, the spring meetings have been dominated by the looming threat of what many people are calling a trade war. Now, that was big on Madame Lagarde's agenda this morning as she cited some of the downside risks for low-income countries like Jamaica.
International cooperation, which has served us so well over generations, helping to reduce poverty and deliver more progress for more people than at any time in history. This international framework is now being questioned, especially with respect to trade.
Madame Lagarde says it's not just the USA and China. She's urging all countries not to adopt protectionist measures. She says it can be crippling for the world of trade.
Steer clear of all protectionism measures. In that respect, we believe that each country can do more, from looking at its own domestic policies to helping those affected by the dislocation from technological change and trade. So that relates to measures that need to be taken at home to improve compliance, but also to deal with those that are not benefiting from trade.
In the meantime, the IMF Managing Director has suggested that lower-income countries like Jamaica consider strengthening structural reforms as a buffer against protectionism.
Step up the structural reforms. So once again, when the sun is shining, fix the roof, identify what is going to improve growth in the medium term and what could prevent a disappointing return to this mediocre that we had identified for advanced economies, and what will help low-income countries in particular catch up and better develop towards the Sustainable Development Goals of 2030.
Moving on now, facing threats of deportation and the denial of health care, the controversy surrounding the Windrush generation was front and center this week as leaders from the Caribbean gathered in London to attend the Commonwealth Heads of Government meetings.
Where do you come from?
Jamaica.
Have you brought your children with you?
Yes.
How many?
5 children.
Those are some of the children who are now sharing heartbreaking stories. They're being threatened with deportation if they can't prove they're British citizens.
I feel like an alien in this country. Really? Yeah. Because if I've worked and lived in this country for a long time and the Home Office would come and look at me and tell me that I've got no status in this country.
The Empire Windrush brings to Britain 500 Jamaicans. Many are
My mum sent for me from St. Kitts and I came over roughly about, I was about 10, and I went to school. Everything was fine, wasn't it? And when I left school, I was issued my national insurance number. And they requested proof of my right to work in this country and to reside in this country. I came home.
She just cried.
I cried my eyes out because of all was work. He had to come. My husband had to come and pick me up from work because I was astonished. I was thinking, have they made a mistake here?
He came to Britain from Barbados when he was 9 years old, more than 50 years ago. His father had a job in the post office. Michael married in Britain, had children, grandchildren, worked in education, thought he was British, until the government told him he didn't have the right documents. He lost his job as he fought for the right to stay here.
If I was deported, I didn't know what I would do. To take someone out and just throw them out, like if they had no worth, because that is what they're doing. you know? It's about what you've produced and what you've done to help Britain be the better place than it was.
Have people been deported as a result of not having the right papers?
There have been some horrendous situations which, as a minister, have appalled me.
So
what I'm determined to do...
That's a yes. Do you know how many?
No, I don't know the numbers. But what I'm determined to do going forward is to say we'll have no more of this. We want people to have confidence to come to the Home Office.
But people like Glenda Caesar are losing confidence by the day.
We will go back to our own HMRC and DWP records.
She's been here since she was 3 months old and has worked in the NHS for 25 years, but now can't work. She hasn't yet got the paperwork to satisfy the Home Office.
Why am I not British? I've got children, I went to school here, I've got a national insurance number, I had a provisional licence, so why am I not British?
Anyone who came to the UK from a Commonwealth country before 1973 was legally entitled to live here. But there are incomplete records of who arrived, and it's thought around 57,000 people haven't applied for passports to prove their residency. It means many don't have the necessary documents to work, rent property or access benefits. Beverly Booth has been here for 40 years. She came as a teenager from Jamaica in 1979 to join her parents and says she was given the right to stay here. But after the Home Office told her they can't find her records, she was threatened with deportation.
We are contacting you because the Home Office told you you no longer have the right to remain in the UK.
Since then, she was given a temporary right to stay, but that now has also run out. Life has become very difficult financially. Even the NHS is chasing her for medical bills. She fears eviction and deportation.
I feel more than betrayed because we was invited here. We didn't come. Our parents was invited here to come here. And when they come here, they would expect better treatment. And now we're here and we've done what we have to do, build up the country. Like they want to say, we don't want you here.
The political backlash was fierce.
It is inhumane and cruel for so many of that Windrush generation to have suffered so long in this condition and for the Secretary of State only to have made a statement today on this issue. Can she explain how many have been deported? She suggested earlier that she would ask the High Commissioners. It is her department that has deported them. She should know the number. Can she tell the House how many have been detained as prisoners in their own country? Can she tell the House how many have been denied health under the National Health Service? How many have denied pensions? How many have lost their job? This is a day of national shame, and it has come about because of a hostile environment policy that was begun under her Prime Minister. Let us call it as it is. If you lay down with dogs, you get fleas. And that is what has happened with this far-right rhetoric in this country.
Caribbean leaders sat down with British Prime Minister Theresa May, where she offered an apology.
I want to apologise to you today because we are genuinely sorry for any anxiety that has been caused.
This is a complete and utter disgrace, isn't it? I mean, let's just not sugarcoat this.
Yeah, it is, especially the new revelation about the destruction of documentary evidence, which could easily help to resolve some of the issues. But I prefer to look at the positive side of it. That
what is the positive side of it?
The government reacted and apologized and has put in place, or are putting in place, measures.
But they don't, I mean, you asked the Prime Minister yesterday, and let's remind viewers, these documents, a lot of them were destroyed in 2010 when Theresa May was the Home Secretary. Happened on her watch, right? So when she apologises, that's fine, but actually she was the catalyst for all this, I'm afraid. Let's cut to the quick. When you asked her yesterday, have people been deported, she didn't know, did she?
Well, they weren't able to provide a definitive answer, but they have undertaken to give that definitive answer. My interest is to ensure that the Windrush generation and the children of the Windrush generation get justice. So we have to call it out for what it is, but we also have to ensure that those who have been deported, that they get access to a process that gets them back, that they get their citizenship, that they get their full rights, and that they get access to the benefits that their citizenship would entitle them.
And should they get full compensation for any legal fees that they...
My view, clearly, I'm not the British government, but my view is that if there is an acceptance that a wrong was done, then there should be a process of restoration. And I'm certain that the very strong and robust civil society and democracy that you have will come up with a process of compensation.
Because people have been sacked.
Yes.
They've lost their right to work as
Yes.
a result, and they cannot claim
Yeah, but
benefits.
then it's a matter of the denial of the dignity of the citizenship, which really cannot be restored when you come to think of it. Yes, I agree totally.
But for many people at the center of this controversy, the reason it happened is literally black and white.
The government is wrong of what they're doing to people of colour. Really, it is disgusting, very disgusting.
You see, everybody tried to say it was a mistake.
It's not a mistake.
It's not a mistake.
It can't be a mistake.
Company news comes up next, then later, Cuba has a new president, and for the first time in 6 decades, it's not a Castro. We'll tell you who he is and how he rose to power. More WBR after this break. Welcome back to Weekend Business Report. Here's Javon Keys with this week's company news.
Berger Paints Jamaica is looking to tap into new markets such as Cuba, Dominican Republic, and Puerto Rico, along with other countries in Central America and the Greater CARICOM region. The company is recording net profit of $174 million for the 9 months period March to December 2017. The company also says the outlook for 2018 and beyond is extremely positive, as the brand remains strong and continues to dominate the local market with strong brand equity and a reputation for quality. Plans are already being implemented to expand local distribution and product range, as well as to improve customer service and responsiveness. Jamaican Teas Limited, formerly Tetley Tea Company, is the largest producer of tea in the Caribbean with over 40 different varieties. The company recently added coffee to its portfolio. The company surpassed the $1 billion profit margin for 2017 after there was a 34% increase in profits from shareholders' equity. Non-executive director at Jamaican Teas, John Jackson, says the company performed significantly well last year, with export continuously growing over the past 4 years. Meanwhile, Chief Executive Director John Mafood says crime has made the local economy unfavorable for business. However, the company has seen rising profits outside of Jamaica since last year, a trend that is continuing in 2018. Paramount Trading Jamaica is looking to its bleach and lubricant lines to help drive growth this year. Paramount Chemical sales for the 9 months up to February 2018 amounted to a little over $1 billion. That's up from the $836 million recorded for the same period in the previous year. That's a difference of about $200 million. The company's lubricants line has performed well this quarter compared to the same period last year, increasing by $39 million on a quarterly basis and $81 million year to year.
Thanks, Javon. Let's now take a look at the closing numbers from the major stock markets around the world. When we come back, more of the top news stories BATV brought you this week, so stay with us. Welcome back to Weekend Business Report. More news now. Prime Minister Andrew Holness brought the message of inclusive prosperity to the joint forum panel discussion at the Commonwealth Heads of Government meeting in London on Thursday. The Prime Minister told the audience that one major issue standing in the way of Commonwealth countries achieving this is climate change.
Last year in the Caribbean, we experienced 3 Category 5 hurricanes. Hurricanes which wiped out entire nations. Nations who are a part of our beloved Commonwealth.
He said dealing with the issue so far, for the most part, has been more talk than substance, leaving the Caribbean and Pacific states still vulnerable. He argued that funding for resilience and adaptation mitigation cannot be treated as aid.
It is imperative that the conversation around climate change and how it is to be financed be treated as an investment. That we make the investment in the resilience of these countries who are affected so that they can withstand, live through, and recover quickly from these variable and extreme weather events.
However, the Prime Minister was quick to point out that this is not about handouts.
I don't want it to seem that small island states and developing countries are perpetually seeking aid and assistance. That's not the case. I believe that most developing countries have fully accepted that we must take responsibility for our own development and for our future. All we ask for is a fair environment, sustainable solutions that bring long-term security and in which we can all share prosperity.
The All Jamaica Consumer Price Index, CPI, declined for the second consecutive month as a negative 0.1% inflation rate was recorded for March 2018. Norder Francis Williams tells us more.
According to the Consumer Price Index CPI bulletin released today by the Statistical Institute of Jamaica Stating, the main contributor to negative inflation rate was the 1% fall in the index for the heaviest weighted division, food and non-alcoholic beverages. The decline was due to lower prices for agricultural produce, resulting in a 4.3% reduction in the index for the class vegetables and starchy foods. The division, transport, also recorded a decline in its index of 0.4% for the period on the account of lower fuel prices. However, these movements were tempered by the upward movement, 3.2% in the index for the division housing, water, electricity, gas and other fuels. This was primarily due to high electricity, water and sewage rates. Meanwhile, as at March 2018, the calendar year-to-date inflation was negative 0.2% and the movement in the index for the fiscal year was 3.9%. In the meantime, a breakdown of the 3 regions for the month showed that the Greater Kingston metropolitan area declined by 0.3%, while other urban centers and rural areas each registered negligible movements in their index.
Strengthening trade relations between Cuba and Jamaica was the focus of a forum put on by JAMPRO on Monday. A Cuban delegation met with JAMPRO representatives to discuss the possible benefits for both countries. Ocean Morgan reports.
Cuba and Jamaica has had a long-standing relation, but with the opening of Cuba's economy to the world recently, JAMPRO is increasing efforts to deepen and strengthen these relationships.
Cuba and Jamaica have had a long history of close friendship, and there is great opportunity for us to further deepen our relationships through the development and advancement of strong commercial relations. Our invitation to Cuba to come on this trade mission is part of our strategic move in that direction.
Minister without portfolio in the Ministry of Industry, Commerce, Agriculture and Fisheries, J.C. Hutchinson, says there are potential gains to be had from seizing opportunities for export of food, beverages, and cosmetic products on the Cuban market.
Cuba is a strategic market for export from Jamaica, yet it remains vastly underexplored. A strong potential demand exists given its population of over 11 million and a growing tourism sector. There are opportunities for Jamaica to supply the market with a range of goods, food products like milk products, frozen meats and chicken, candies, snacks, cereals, beverages, canned meats, etc.
He says his ministry is committed to working with JAMPRO and the Private Sector Organization of Jamaica to increase the amount of local products available on the Cuban market.
When we come back, Miguel Diaz-Canel, he's Cuba's new president. We'll tell you more about him after the break. Welcome back to Weekend Business Report. Miguel Diaz-Canel is Cuba's new president. He was officially confirmed and sworn in on Thursday. Al Jazeera's Lucia Newman has more.
Tall, serious, efficient, and above all, discreet. Rising up the Communist Party's ranks from the bottom, 57-year-old Miguel Diaz-Canel is making history. He's done it in part by never ever having tried to outshine or question Fidel or Raúl Castro, as others once earmarked as their successors learned the hard way.
And I think they also feel he's extremely loyal, extremely patriotic, that he actually genuinely believes in the Cuban Revolution.
As the Communist Party secretary of his home province of Villa Clara, Diaz-Canel earned a reputation for being open-minded. The Menjunje is a hangout for young people, including gays, lesbians, transsexuals, and punks. Diaz-Canel was by their side in the 1990s when alternative lifestyles were severely frowned on.
Even after he rose to the top, every time he came to Santa Clara, one of the first things he'd do was come see us at the Menjunje. He's the same unassuming, humble person.
Maybe so, but in most of Cuba, people know very little about the first man in 6 decades who will rule this island, whose name is not Castro. In fact, he was the only candidate in the vote by the National Assembly on Wednesday. We asked this man what he thought of the selection process.
Let my silence speak for itself. It's the silence of many Cubans.
Those who may be expecting a major shift will clearly be disappointed.
We are encouraging, reaffirming and consolidating continuity, which is very important for the defense of the revolution, which today is being threatened and attacked by a relationship with the US that has deteriorated.
The truth is that Diaz-Canel has been chosen not to reform, but to improve Cuban socialism, if he can. And while he does represent a generation younger than that of the Castros, he will have to answer to a power much higher than his own, the Cuban Communist Party. Lucia Newman, Al Jazeera, Havana.
And that's our show for this week. On behalf of the entire Weekend Business Report team, I'm Kenil. See you next time.